6:05 a.m. Waters 12 nautical miles southwest of Dongsha Island. The sea lies unnervingly still beneath a blanket of dense fog. Aboard 3 Zodiac rubber boats, 15 Taiwanese special operators from the Amphibious Reconnaissance Patrol, ARP, hold their breath, weapons on safe, drifting freely to avoid leaving a wake. To China's Yaogan 30 surveillance satellites, they are nothing more than tiny thermal specks, isolated, exposed, and seemingly moments away from being crushed, as 2 12,000-ton China Coast Guard cutters surge toward them at 25 knots. But China does not realize that 2 deadly secrets are already in play. First, 3 supersonic Shengfeng 3 coastal anti-ship missile launchers have quietly locked onto the target from a cliff 15 kilometers away. Second, the U.S. Navy Virginia-class fast attack submarine is lying silent at a depth of 200 meters, hidden within the gray zone. This is the story of how 15 soldiers trapped on the razor's edge of life and death sent shockwaves all the way to Beijing. Dongsha sits astride the northern gateway to the South China Sea, where seabed depth drops abruptly from the shallow continental shelf into the 5,000-meter-deep Manila Trench. This is the only submerged highway through which China's Type 094 Jin-class nuclear ballistic missile submarines can slip into the Pacific without being detected by the US-Japan SOSUS sensor network. For Taipei, Dongsha is not merely territory. It is a sentinel eye, providing early warning while monitoring 60% of maritime and air traffic entering the Taiwan Strait. Lose Dongsha, and Taiwan is effectively blinded on its southwestern flank. With over $5 trillion in global trade transiting this region each year, a single shot fired here would cause global maritime insurance markets to collapse instantly. Both sides understand the stakes. Whoever controls Dongsha holds the key to sealing off the entire South China Sea. The silence is shattered by the deep, chest-rattling blast of a high-power horn. Out of the fog emerges the bow of a massive white ship, marked 5901, looming like a moving high-rise, crushing the sea beneath it. This is the largest China Coast Guard vessel in the world, nicknamed the Monster, a 12,000-ton behemoth armed with a 76mm H-Splash PJ-26 naval gun. Facing this 165-meter steel giant are 3 tiny Zodiac rubber boats carrying Taiwanese special forces, bobbing helplessly like leaves before a storm. The distance collapses at terrifying speed, 2 nautical miles, 1.5 nautical miles. Whoosh, whoosh. The shriek of water tearing apart erupts from the port side. 2 smaller Zhaotou-class China Coast Guard cutters, 4,000 tons each, break formation and accelerate to 25 knots, generating 3-meter bow waves that slam directly into the Zodiac boats. "Hold formation! No firing!" the Taiwanese commander shouts over encrypted comms. The operators cling to safety lines, drenched head to toe, fighting to keep the boats from capsizing. Then CCG 5901 activates its psychological weapon, LRAD, long-range acoustic device. A focused beam of high-frequency sound slams into the team. Shh. It feels like thousands of needles stabbing the eardrums, inducing instant vertigo and nausea. This is not a warning. It is acoustic torture, designed to force surrender without firing a single round. The situation escalates to a red alert. Passive sensors in the operator's helmet systems register a target lock. 5 nautical miles away, a Type 056A Jiangdao-class missile corvette, Sanmensha, breaks off from a distant exercise and charges in at 28 knots. Its 76mm gun rotates, pointing directly at the Commandos' coordinates. Beijing believes it has already won. 15 men, 3 rubber boats, trapped between 20,000 tons of steel and overwhelming firepower. No escape. According to calculations at Southern Theater Command headquarters, Taiwan will be forced to accept the capture of its personnel to avoid full-scale war. But they have made a fatal mistake. They see 3 boats, but they do not see what is waiting in the deep, black water below. Aboard the Type 056A corvette Sanmensha, confidence fills the Combat Information Center, CIC. The crew believes capturing 15 special operators is merely a procedural matter. Then, ping, ping, the towed array sonar screams a piercing alert, shattering the calm. On the waterfall display, 2 massive thermal traces bloom not at long range, but directly beneath the ship, at the 7 o'clock, and 5 o'clock bearings. Report! Submerged contacts detected. Range, my God, only 2,500 meters, the sonar officer shouts, his voice cracking with terror. They are 2 Hai Lung-class Sea Dragon submarines of the Taiwanese Navy. Though based on an older 1980s design derived from the Dutch Zwaardvis class, they have received combat system upgrades. More importantly, they've been lying in ambush on the seabed, engines shut down, exploiting the thermal layer of the trench to remain invisible to China's passive sonar. 6:17 a.m. At the same moment, the eastern sky roars. 4 F-16V Vipers suddenly surge up from sea-skimming altitude, activating their AN/APG-83 Sabre ASA radars. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Radar warning receivers, RWRs, aboard CCG 5901 and San Menxia scream uncontrollably. They are no longer hunters. They are being locked by 8 AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles from above, and 4 wire-guided SUT heavyweight torpedoes from below. Beijing is stunned. The salami slicing strategy has failed. They have walked straight into a preset kill box. The order to capture the 15 Commandos is cancelled instantly. Now the question is the survival of hundreds of Chinese sailors. Escalation accelerates at breakneck speed. Command chains from Taipei to Beijing light up simultaneously. 6:19 a.m. Mainland response. At Shantou Air Base, China scrambles a flight of 4 J-16 heavy fighters. With a 12-ton weapons load and powerful ASA radar, the J-16s are ordered to dash toward Dongsha at Mach 1.8, over 2,200 kilometers per hour. Mission: force the Taiwanese F-16Vs to disengage. 6:21 a.m. Electronic warfare begins when Taiwan's E-2K Hawkeye early warning aircraft detects the J-16 launch. Taiwan immediately activates ground-based electronic jamming. Chinese ship radars filled with ghosts, dozens of flickering false targets, making it impossible to distinguish real F-16s from deception. Whoosh! Zzz. Radio communications between CCG 5901 and the mainland stutter under heavy interference. 6:23 a.m. The distance between the 2 Hai Lung submarines and San Menxia shrinks to 1,800 meters. At this range, SUT torpedoes cannot miss. The Taiwanese submarine commander opens torpedo tubes 1 and 2. Seawater floods the tubes, producing the unmistakable sound that Chinese passive sonar detects clearly. It is the sound of a weapon chambered. 6:25 a.m. Ballistic missile signaling U.S. Seabir's early warning satellites detect unusual thermal signatures deep inside China. The PLA Rocket Force, PLARF, has placed DF-21D medium-range ballistic missile brigades, the so-called carrier killers, on Level 1 combat. Readiness. The message to Washington is unmistakable. Do not intervene. 6:27 a.m. The J-16 flight reaches the airspace over Dongsha and meets the F-16Vs head-on. Numbers: 4 versus 4. Separation: 40 kilometers. The J-16's PL-15 long-range air-to-air missiles, range 200 kilometers, lock onto the F-16Vs. In response, the F-16Vs brought the J-16s into the sights of AIM-120C7 AMRAAMs. At this moment, the skies and seas around Dongsha contain enough explosive power to obliterate an entire fleet. All it would take is one nervous pilot, one trembling finger, or one minor technical failure, and World War III would begin right here. 6:28 a.m. The distance between the corvette San Menxia and the Hai Lung-class submarine shrinks to 1,200 meters. At this range, China's torpedo countermeasures are effectively useless. If launched, an SUT torpedo would strike San Menxia's hull in 45 seconds. Above, Taiwanese F-16V pilots flip open the red safety covers on their control sticks, thumbs hovering over the trigger. In their headsets, a continuous beep sounds the targeting tone, confirming that Harpoon missiles have positively identified China Coast Guard cutter 5901. At the same time, the Type 1130 11-barrel 30mm Sea Whiz on San Menxia slews into position, barrels trained on the low-flying F-16Vs. At 10,000 rounds per minute, it can form a steel wall capable of shredding anything in the air. 6:29 a.m. 60 fateful seconds. In Beijing, Southern Theater Command recognizes a tactical blunder. They focus too intently on the 15 Commandos, leaving the undersea flank exposed. If they opened fire to eliminate the team, Sanmenxia and the monster 5901 would almost certainly be sunk by torpedoes. Trading 2 modern warships and hundreds of sailors for 15 enemy troops is a catastrophic exchange. The commander of 5901 shouts over the radio, "We are being targeted. Request permission to fire. Repeat, request for permission to fire." No answer. Silence stretches 10 seconds, 20 seconds. 6:30 a.m. A Taiwanese Zodiac is jolted by a sudden swell. Its engine revs loudly. Startled, a Chinese gunner tightens his finger on a 12.7mm heavy machine gun. Crack! A tracer round slices through the air, missing the Commandos by meters and slamming into the sea, water erupting around them. "Stop! Cease fire immediately!" blares the loudspeaker from 5901. The Chinese commander intervenes at the final second. Had that round struck a man, Taiwanese torpedoes would have left their tubes. It is the moment when fate, perhaps God, intervenes in the South China Sea. 6:32 a.m. The fuse is pulled. An encrypted emergency withdrawal order flashes from Beijing to 5901 and the J-16 flight. In the air, the 4 J-16s execute a sharp break right, dumping flares as a final warning before accelerating back toward the mainland. At sea, Sanmenxia and 5901 lay thick smoke screens, turn 180 degrees, and sprint at maximum speed. Out of the danger zone, abandoning the disputed waters. 6:35 a.m. As the Chinese ships vanish behind the smoke, a Taiwanese CH-47SD Chinook, which had been hovering 20 kilometers away at ultra-low altitude, rushes in. Thump, thump, thump. Ropes drop. The 15 ARP Commandos clip in and are hauled aboard, soaked, shaken, but alive. 6:45 a.m. The high-lung submarines dive to 300 meters, disappearing into the depths to resume covert patrol. The skies over Dongsha return to their uneasy calm, white smoke trails slowly dissolving. The confrontation ends in under 45 minutes, with no official casualties. Yet it permanently alters the strategic calculations on both sides of the strait. By 8 a.m., the world finally began to grasp what had just occurred, but through 2 completely different lenses. Xinhua released a brief statement at 9 a.m. China Coast Guard forces carried out professional law enforcement measures to expel illegal intruders from southern waters, firmly safeguarding national sovereignty. There was no mention of target locks or the presence of enemy submarines. This was how Beijing preserved face for its mighty fleet before a domestic audience. In contrast, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense maintained strategic silence, leaking only a single black and white periscope photograph to the international press. The massive CCG 5901, perfectly centered in a crosshair, accompanied by a cryptic caption, "We watch, we wait." Western military observers, however, were electrified. Analysts examining Planet Labs satellite imagery pointed out the abnormal wake patterns left by Sanmenxia as it executed a sudden, hard turn. A sensational headline followed. 40 minutes of suffocation. How the Wolfpack tactic stopped a giant. Why did Beijing, with a defense budget 15 times larger than Taiwan's and the largest fleet in the world, accept withdrawal in the face of a tiny force? The answer lies in a ruthless cost-benefit analysis. Taiwan did not play ship versus ship, a contest it would surely lose. Instead, it used 15 soldiers as bait, luring China's high-value assets, the hundreds of millions of dollars CCG 5901 and a Type 056A corvette, into a submarine kill zone. Trading 2 modern warships for 15 special operators is a ruinous exchange no commander would authorize. The failure of deterrence. The monster 5901 was built to intimidate by size, not to fight a submarine war. When intimidation failed and the opponent drew a weapon in response, the deterrent effect vanished. Had Chinese ships opened fire, Taiwan would have launched torpedoes. The result? China loses ships, Taiwan loses men. But the image of Chinese warships sunk by aging submarines would have been a propaganda catastrophe for Beijing, shattering the myth of invincibility. They did not retreat because their weapons were inferior. They withdrew because the price of victory was too high. At 06:05 a.m., 15 commandos appeared to be holding a death sentence. At 06:45 a.m., they returned to base, leaving behind a calm sea hiding powerful undercurrents. The 40-minute Dongsha incident stands as a stark reminder. In modern warfare, size is not everything. The lethal silence of a submarine, the cold decisiveness of command, and a carefully laid trap can neutralize even a billion-dollar fleet. Peace in the Pacific is sometimes preserved not by handshakes at diplomatic tables, but by a finger resting on a torpedo launch button, 200 meters below the surface.